Democrats need to pair. Democrats, because I was going to say it, Democrats need to grow a pair if they want to start winning again. According to a new poll, liberal women are the most unhappy and lonely group. Only 12% of them claim to be completely satisfied with their lives. And it's because all the manly men have flocked to President Trump. The Republican Party has capitalized on masculinity thanks to Democrats' obsession with catering to wimpy beta males. Clay Travis summed it up perfectly. Watch this.
Trump's like a grandpa.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
Trump took a bullet in his ear and immediately stood up and said, fight, fight, fight. Every man in America and most of the women out here were impressed by that, even if the women won't admit it. She's shaking her head strong. And second part of this, basically summing it up, Democrats for men are and
okay, so you get the picture of what this is about. That's good morning, Carrie. Are you the only one here? Michael keeping everybody late again? All right. Well, that's the crux of today's show. Thought I'd talk about this. That was Clay Travis, who is one of the guys I listened to, one of my worldview guys. I read a book of his years ago. My business partner, turned me on to him. And he had written a book called Republicans. Oh, he's not today. Okay, so it's just maybe no one's, I don't know. It's a Thursday. Everyone should still be motivated. It's not Friday, but excuse me. Yeah, Clay wrote a book years ago that said it was called Republicans Buy Sneakers Too, I think. And it was a quote by Michael Jordan, asked why he didn't make statements on politics like other athletes did. Which really meant, why don't you support liberal and progressive politics like other athletes are forced to do? And he says, well, because then I'd alienate half my customer base. And if you knew Michael Jordan, he was a shoe salesman. He called himself, he was the best basketball player ever, but he said, I'm really a shoe salesman. I work for Nike, because they're the ones that paid most of his salary, even more than the NBA. So that was Clay Travis, and he's the owner of Outkick, called Outkick the Coverage was his website, and he does sports commentary. And now he's along with Buck Sexton, he's the substitute for Rush Limbaugh. They took over the EIB network. All right, Carrie, you got. Actually, you missed it by 2 days. It was 2 days ago. So I think you wished me happy birthday once before. I don't know how do you know that? How do you know my birthday is in February? I'd be interested to know. But yeah, it was a couple days ago. I hit dyslexic 56. Put it that way. And if you could figure that out, a little cryptic answer there. But yeah, so Clay Travis took over for Rush Limbaugh, him and Buck Sexton. And he's had a metamorphosis himself. He was a Democrat. And then like a lot of other, thank you. But my birthday's not for another year. I don't know, you're way early, but okay. So you listen, did I admit that? Okay. I must have said that last February, but yes, you do, Gary. You're one of the faithful ones. I remember that. From way back with William, you were faithful when we called you Eureka. So, yeah. So back to this, Clay Travis is a sports commentator, and he's had a slow progression from the liberal side to the conservative side, like so many other people, especially male commentators, and I guess you call them influencers these days. We used to call media people are now online influencers. That's kind of where media and news and culture have gone. And Clay, like I said, he wrote a book about how the sports industry was alienating conservatives, first of all, and with that, men, because obviously sports is mostly a male watched phenomenon. And he said, with all the political action they're taking, they're just driving people away. And they did drive me away. I was driven away from the NBA long ago because of all the politics that they had gotten involved in. And the NFL, I left about, I guess it would be 7 years ago. I'm a San Diego guy, right? And the Chargers left about San Diego for LA about 7 years ago. And that was about the same time that they were all kneeling for the anthem, if you remember, all that stuff. And that was kind of a double whammy for me, them taking away my team. And I figured I had watched enough pro football, and I had my college teams to root for, and they've mostly stayed out of politics. Colleges have started to go a little bit that way a few years ago with a lot of the BLM stuff, but they didn't go too far. So, so that was him saying what basically is, it should be obvious, I think, that men, it's such a radical thing. One of the first things Trump did, first executive order, was the court now will be the official position of the United States government that there are only two genders. Well, duh. It just, again, as it's so obvious to say, that it's such a blatant commentary on where our culture is, that a president has to say, no, wait a minute. We need to make this official. There's only two genders, or two sexes, really. But that's where we're at today. We have gone so far into the crazy zone and so far away from not only masculine themes, but just truth, basic truth, what's right and wrong. And I'm going to hang on to that thought. Men, that's such a simple thing. What Clay just said there in the clip, I think, is right. I think when Trump took that bullet to the ear and stood up and exposed himself again and said, fight, 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 that really was, election was over right then. And it was such a defining moment that it couldn't help. If you were a man, you really couldn't help but follow. I want to follow that guy, the guy that takes a bullet. And rightly, a lot of people commented that he took a bullet for us, because the powers that be, and you can't tell me that the powers that be didn't allow that to happen or facilitate that happening. Not to get too far into the weeds on this, but for him to even have been on that stage with all that was going on, them knowing someone was on a roof, for them to even put him out on that stage, that was an intentional thing all the way around. And which means that this was the establishment, and Trump was right. By going after him, they're really going after us. He's the one standing between them and us. And that's why they had to take him down. And they missed their shot. And then they tried again, and they didn't even get a shot. And then it became so obvious that they had to, I don't know if Trump got his own private security now. I haven't really heard. I hope he does. Or I hope he had it throughout the campaign. And I hope he just says as president, hey, I don't trust you Secret Service guys. I'm going to have my own security mixed in, and you better deal with them. Because I don't think they're done. I don't think he's out of the woods by any long shot. Because the establishment, the swamp, the Beltway, whatever, the powers that be can't have this. And this is what is so amazing to see this whole thing going on. That sounds kind of blatant, Kerry. Trump shut down their plan to destroy America. Oh, come on. They're not trying to destroy America. Yes, they are. Barack Obama put it a little more subtly than that, But when he was first on his first campaign, I think 2 weeks before the election, they knew it was in the bag for him. John McCain wasn't certainly going to beat him. McCain wasn't even trying. And he said, we are 2 weeks away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. So this started in earnest under Barack Obama. It had been going on for 100 years, since Woodrow Wilson, maybe even Teddy Roosevelt. Certainly with FDR and LBJ and Jimmy Carter, all these things. Has been a 100 and something year long process of undermining America, chipping away at the foundations of America. But then Barack Obama came in and just started taking sledgehammers to it, and that's been happening for the last 15 years. So, and basically, what are the fundamentals of America? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, e pluribus unum. In God we trust, right? The Bill of Rights, the Constitution. Those are the fundamentals. Free speech, freedom of religion, right to bear arms. All that stuff is the foundations, the fundamentals of America. And what Barack Obama did, he said, okay, we're taking away those fundamentals. They're gone. So how does that relate to men? Well, men, first of all, obviously the country was founded at a time where society was much more patriarchal, which it had been for however many thousands of years before there had been human society. Human society has always been patriarchal. And the United States was kind of our revolution, again, was a different one. And it was a different patriarchy. And this goes back, it's funny, I've been reading through the Bible in a year. It started in January, obviously, last month. And I've been reading through Leviticus, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, because it just starts at the beginning of the Old Testament, beginning of the New Testament. And I'm noticing something. There's a lot of Leviticus. I'm plowing through Leviticus right now. And it's funny, Leviticus says a lot about women and, how all the rules for all the things that women have to deal with. But it's amazing that women are, it sounds to our ears like, oh, women are second-class citizens in this society. But if you look at all the different things that God says, don't be like the people that were in the land before you. Don't do the things that they did. Women weren't even human to society at that time, to the world at that time, to the other cultures. Women were not even people. They were property. They were just things to be abused and owned, and they had no rights at all. And so even the stuff, and we look back in Leviticus and think this makes women second-class citizens. No, that elevated women to citizenship and to being valuable in the eyes of God, and not just property and playthings for men, which they had been. And so but that didn't take on with the rest of the world. That was in Israelite society and Jewish society. But the rest of the world throughout history, women weren't much different until Western ideas came out, and the Western ideas came out of the Bible, and specifically the United States. The founders went so much back to that. And so it was a patriarchy that went back to that and flourished throughout the world with a patriarchy that valued women. And I know a lot of women don't think it is, but it really is. And under this patriarchy, in less than 200 years, women have completely changed their roles in society and in the world. And, I argue now, every once in a while, my wife or someone will say, oh, it's a man's world out there. And I'm like, I don't think so. I don't think it is anymore. Or certainly it's changing to where women are in every position of power and at every field you can imagine. So this is where things get a little interesting, because in our society, where men have allowed, again, and women wouldn't have had the rights that they've had unless men stepped back and said, yes, you can have these rights. This, when I was a kid, it was called women's lib or feminism, or whatever, would not have survived in any other patriarchal society in the world, but it did in the U.S., in the American patriarchal, and in the West. The Judeo-Christian West. Judeo-Christian is the key phrase there. Lucas, late but here, man, you missed it. Okay, if I don't need another guy in here. So talking about why men have left the Democratic Party, Lucas, and anybody else that's joining us, and talking about why that happened and how that relates. But as things go in broken, even like America being the Judeo-Christian foundation it is, we're still sinful, and society still eventually goes downhill because of the sinfulness of man. And so things have gotten out of balance, let's say, and things have gotten beyond crazy. Like I said, for the president to declare now, hey, wait a minute, there's only two genders. We can't have men and women's sports, all that. And all that stuff appeals to men. And it's stuff that men have been sitting on for so long. They've seen this kind of thing happen throughout society in the last 20 years, especially, of this devaluing of them as people. Years ago, I was in a church when I was a young single man in the 80s, and this movement started of male bashing, and it kind of got into the church. And at that time, I was at a church that had a lot of men in it, a lot of military men in San Diego, and a lot of women. Where there's a lot of good men like military men, there's going to be a lot of women, and there are a lot of women in this church. And it was kind of hard to date when you were up against a bunch of military guys. But then this kind of thing came in where at the church at that time, this thing from society came in where it says men are kind of the problem here. Men are, they don't express their feelings very well. They don't listen, and they're not good at church and at the things we want from them. And and in society, that was kind of the point that was being put out. So that started taking hold, and it started taking hold as a society. As it was taking hold as a society, it started infiltrating into the church. And it's gotten to the point now where I think there's a parallel. There has been a parallel between societal involvement and political involvement, cultural involvement, and I guess engagement, you'd say, and spiritual engagement with the church. So and you will have to excuse me, I'm still getting over my cold from last week. So, but I did want to share one other thing for you, because I want to relate this to the church, obviously. Years ago, I came across a book called Why Men Hate Going to Church. And short story, or long story short, I should say, I was at a church, and church I've been going to for years, that same church. And it had gone very far by that time the other way. This is around the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And it was when the kind of the elevation style emerging church kind of movement had taken over. And there was just a lot of singing going on, and a lot of the songs I considered, and you've heard this before, there was a lot of love songs to Jesus, passionate love songs to Jesus that were being sung. And I just couldn't do it. I said, the Lord, there must be something wrong with me, because I can't do this anymore. And I can't sing these songs. And I remember I told a friend of mine about it, an old friend of mine. And he's like, oh, you should read this book. There's a book called Why Men Hate Going to Church. And I said, there's a book? Somebody wrote a book? And so it's by a guy named Dave Murrow. And he noticed this problem that churches are about 60%, at the time, 60% women and about 40% men. Now I think it's probably up to about 65-35, I would guess. And I read this book, and it had so much to say. And I have this. Um, that's the basic premise of it. And that really spoke to me because it's really true. And um, once I knew this, once I found out that there was a book and people, um, um, yeah, okay, here we go. Men and ladies, women's restroom, men and women's sports is backwards, but it doesn't really go the other way, does it, Lucas? It doesn't really. And then I don't like the music part of church. One or two songs is fine. Yes, I agree. And that's something I've been dealing with in my church now. Sometimes we'll sing 6, 7, maybe even 8 songs, and it's just out of balance. It's really out of balance. They do mix in a few old hymns, which move me. If I hear an old hymn being sung, I'll close my eyes and I'll make it a prayer. I'll sing the words to God softly, mainly so I can hear my wife sing. My wife has the most beautiful voice. Oh my gosh. And so I'll just hear the congregation sing. And if you listen to a hymn being sung versus a modern song, the congregation really gets into it. So there's a parallel here between what's happening in society and what's happening in church. Because the church has followed society so much. So many churches have, over the past 15, 20 years, really bowed the knee to political pressure. And of course, I'll go back to it time and time again. About 5 years ago, when we had this and this going on, and you were being told to do those things and told to close your church down, that was kind of the breaking point, I think, for the church in America. The churches that did that, so many churches did that. And like I said, we showed a hostile government that if you pressure us enough, you don't have to shut us down. You pressure us enough and scare us enough, we'll shut ourselves down. That's how little we think of ourselves as representatives of the body of Christ. And so, and the influence of the church from the last 5 years has really, I mean, it was waning before that, but in the last 5 years, think about all the things that we've seen in churches. Whenever I travel throughout the country, any major city in the world or in the country, probably not in the world, but I say in the country, you see empty old cathedrals and churches with multicolored flags hanging from them and political banners on them from the far, far left. And and I think, I haven't seen numbers lately. These numbers that Dave said, 60% women, 40% men, that's just 20 years ago. Now I'm sure that it's even more. I know in my conservative Baptist church that I go to, it's at least 60-40 men now, or women to men now. And it might even be more. By a rough count, sometimes I do a rough count in my church, and it's mostly women because we sing so much. Even though we have a very conservative pastor and very good Bible-based preaching, it's still mostly women. So, and Jesus's model was to take men and disciple them. So, so we'll see where the church goes on this. Society has now reached its breaking point with the election of Trump. The craziness of a progressive-minded, feminist-minded society has reached a breaking point. And finally, we've been given social permission to start returning masculinity to our society. Trump's not going to install patriarchy. Look at all the strong women he's put in on his cabinet, my Lord. So that's not going to happen, but we're under strong male leadership now, and men are responding to it and women are responding to it. So what's the church going to do? And I'd encourage anybody out there to talk to your pastor some way, say, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Look where society's going. So, so that's what I had this. I was going to do a little more time on this, but I don't know if any of you caught the SNL 50th anniversary SNL. I was going to talk a little bit about that, not nearly as much time as I was hoping, but I caught the 50th anniversary event of Saturday Night Live, and I just wondered what you guys, if anybody watched that, only because it's been such a cultural influence. And I know most of us here, Lucas, you're probably too young. Lucas, you are, I think you said 84 you were born, so this started way before you, but everybody else, I think here, should remember the beginning of SNL. And I've always thought that was kind of a barometer of society, the way that show went. When it started in the 70s, the mid 70s was kind of this drug kind of late hippie kind of thing with Chevy Chase and John Belushi and all that drug humor. And then the 80s, it kind of got to more Billy Crystal and Martin Short and all these guys who were a little more, hey, fun and clean. And then it went to guys like Dana Carvey and John Lovitz and all those guys. And then in the 90s, it had its own flavor with Mike Myers and Dana Carvey and Phil Hartman and all those guys. And then I kind of lost track of it, but I just I didn't see the special, but I've seen clips of it. I saw the monologue from Steve Martin, and Steve Martin is the funniest. Him and John Cleese from Monty Python, I think, are the two funniest guys I've ever seen in my life. If you haven't caught it, it's just hysterical. So, but that was kind of, it's funny in talking about society, and me being a semi-student of society as I sit back, because I'm a watcher. I'm a watcher and an analyzer. I've been told my gifts are wisdom, discernment, things like that. So, okay. So individually, those guys were fine. SNL was awful. Yeah. SNL, the old stuff was funny. Wayne's, yeah, I like Wayne's World. There's so many things to like. I mean, Eddie Murphy, you know, the James Brown hot tub and I'm Gumby and all that stuff. So there's so much funny parts. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Jim Carrey's right up there too with funny guys, but he was never on SNL. And Steve Martin really never was on SNL either, but he was, I mean, the first time I ever saw King Tut dance was on SNL. So, oh, Carrie, no way. SNL. Okay. Carrie's not a fan. Hey, you know, I don't, yeah. It was just, yeah, it was so different back in the day. And it wasn't SNL back in the days. It was Saturday night. Not Saturday Night Live, but it's live from New York. It's Saturday night. And then it changed to Saturday Night Live. So that's just a little tidbit. But anyways, I was going to talk about that a little bit more. But obviously, when you get me going on church and men in church and things like that, I tend to get a little windy on that. But I think it's like I said, I think it's important, key point in society. And where is it going to go from here for society, for our country, and most of all, for the body of Christ, the church. So thanks for listening. And I will see you tomorrow with Ben and Michael. Okay.